All right, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this session, Fireside Chat with Dr. David Hyman, the Chief Medical Officer of Eli Lilly. My name is Alec Stranahan. I'm Senior Biotech Analyst at Bank of America, and I'm pleased to be joined by my co-moderator, Dr. Teresa Isla, who you heard is a deep expert on neurology at Harvard and does research as well. So I'm sure that'll be a focus of today's discussion, given Lilly's leadership in neurology. But David, maybe just to start, I think we must touch on GLP-1s. Hopefully that's not the entirety of this conversation with you, since we'll have a metabolism session right after this. But maybe it's a good thing when demand for a new medicine outpaces supply from a business perspective. But maybe just talk about how Lilly is scaling today to meet this demand in the obesity market and where you see the space going moving forward.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a great event and an honor to be here. And always happy to talk about our cardiometabolic franchise and work. I think really the place to start is that it's an incredibly exciting moment for the field to have medicines that can finally address what we now understand to be a serious medical condition and not a lifestyle decision. So I think these medicines are redefining what we used to sort of view as a failing of an individual as a chronic health condition that is associated with severe health consequences and is reversible with treatment. And that's super exciting. It's obviously a very unusual place to be in the pharmaceutical business to actually have a medicine where you can't actually entirely meet the demand for the medicines. I think that reflects the huge effect size of the medicines. It reflects both the hard healthcare benefits we're giving patients, but also the tremendous symptomatic and lifestyle benefits they receive from them, and frankly, the huge prevalence of the condition with nearly 1 billion people worldwide suffering from overweight or obesity and 100 million in the United States. So that sort of unprecedented opportunity means that we've made an unprecedented investment in this. Lilly, as you know, has announced $18 billion in manufacturing CapEx investments to be able to supply our incretin medicines, as well as other medicines we're bringing forward, other innovative medicines we're bringing forward. That number sort of is easy to say, but it's actually hard to comprehend when we actually look at how much we're deploying each month against our manufacturing ramp. It's unprecedented in the pharmaceutical industry. And unfortunately, the sort of time horizon of these build-outs are 3 to 4 years. I think we've finally gotten to a place, as you know, we've announced publicly, where we're able to supply all dosage forms of these medicines in the United States currently, so we're not actually in shortage, but of course we're right at the sort of envelope of meeting the demand as it continues to expand. And that obviously is not just for our currently approved medicine, tirzepatide, which obviously has 2 different brands, Mounjaro and Zepbound, for different indications. But we're really looking in a forward-looking way now to the future incretin medicines that we hope to bring to market. Our triagonist, retatrutide, which is in late-phase development now, as well as our oral small molecule pill, orforglipron, which should begin to report out phase 3 next year. And obviously, we've learned important lessons from scaling Mounjaro and Zepbound, and we're making those forward-looking investments now to help ensure we're not in those same positions moving forward. I guess the last 2 things I'll just mention about this is our current focus now is really on developing evidence around hard outcomes of these medicines. We know the glycemic control they induce, we know the weight changes they induce, but obviously we're now seeing the healthcare benefits that they offer. So this year alone, I think there have been 3 major readouts in obstructive sleep apnea. We've seen the dramatic results of the first medication to treat obstructive sleep apnea. With the number that really sticks for me is that at the end of the study period, and this was a very severe population of obstructive sleep apnea, half the patients had basically did not meet the criteria, the diagnostic criteria for obstructive sleep apnea. That's a tremendous and really unprecedented finding. In HFpEF for patients with systolic heart failure, which we now understand to be a metabolic disease, we see a dramatic decrease, approximately 35% in the composite endpoint of heart failure, which again is a huge effect size, mirrored with improvements in health-related quality, 6-minute walk test, so functional improvements. And then maybe most profoundly was the most recent data we showed with the SURMOUNT extension program, which was the first time that we had the opportunity to look at 3 years of data with Zepbound. And I think there was really two key findings there. One is the real sustained nature of the weight loss. We don't see weight loss creeping up in patients that remain on the medicine, but importantly, a 94% reduction in the rate in pre-diabetics of progressing to type 2 diabetes. That's an incredibly profound result, to see a near complete cessation of patients progressing with pre-diabetes into frank diabetes, because you understand the health consequences of that. So that's where we are. What this opportunity has really unlocked for us, in addition to just the number of lives we were able to touch as a company, is obviously an unprecedented financial wherewithal to take where we are with Mounjaro and Zepbound and future incretins and invest them back into research and development, not only from a manufacturing capacity, but our next generation of innovative medicines in cardiometabolic health and outside of cardiometabolic health.
Thank you, David, and it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm gonna touch on another really exciting topic, Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. I think it's also a time of hope for all of us working in the field, and more importantly for our patients and their families as we witness the arrival of new treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So knowing that Alzheimer's disease has been a long-standing area of research at Lilly for so many years, and with all that experience culminating in the approval of a new anti-amyloid antibody, donanemab, would you tell us what's your understanding of how Alzheimer's treatment will continue to evolve, and what kind of movement you see towards prevention and the preclinical space, and what role, for example, you see of biomarkers will be playing into this understanding? Also, what kind of changes are you looking to make in clinical trials when exploring this space?
Yeah, happy to address that. A couple different questions there. Maybe I could just start off by saying that I had the unexpected honor of being part of the advisory committee where we reviewed the data package of donanemab that received universal support from the members that obviously helped support the FDA approval, an important moment in the company's history and hopefully in the history of this disease. But by far and away, the most meaningful moment of that day as I sat there was listening to the community feedback where we had the honor of about 20 different patients sharing their results and how Alzheimer's has affected them and the benefits they experienced with donanemab. It was a profound experience for me. I've obviously heard individual patients, I've met them on our medicine, but just hearing how this medicine has affected their lives and their caregivers' lives was incredibly moving for me. It's an exciting time in Alzheimer's. I think the approval of donanemab represents over 20 years of continuous work in the field, understanding the science, understanding how to select patients appropriately, innovating on diagnostics, innovating on clinical trial design, persevering through multiple failures. So it's a moment that's worth celebrating. of course, I think we're learning that there are challenges in actually delivering these therapies to patients that are in part related to the medicine, but in part related to the healthcare system's preparedness for delivering this innovation. You know, my background as an oncologist, I have lived through, in my former life as a practicing oncologist, the cycles of innovation outpacing the ability of the healthcare system to deliver these therapies. We went through many years, and arguably we're still on the tail end of sort of seeing genetically targeted therapies in oncology, and yet no one was prepared to actually test patients for the genetic alterations. And so we've lived that. I think we're sort of experiencing a more acute version of that in actually reaching patients with donanemab and medicines like it. We're working hard to do our part as a pharmaceutical company in helping the healthcare system prepare for this innovation and deliver it to patients. I'm actually glad there's more than one pharmaceutical company doing this work. I think people have often described us as in competition with Eisai or Biogen. I actually think that we're all in competition with the healthcare system to actually deliver these important therapies to patients. I guess the one other thing I'll mention, and then happy to dive into any of the other questions you asked, is that a big focus of the company now is not just stopping at the early symptomatic treatment, which is what we have now, but just applying the broader pattern recognition, which is that when you intervene early in chronic diseases, and certainly irreversible neurodegenerative diseases, that you can have much larger effect sizes and more profound effects. And so a big focus of the company now is applying these amyloid-targeted therapies to the preclinical setting. These are patients that have pathologic disease burden in the brain, but have not yet manifested the cognitive impairment associated with Alzheimer's disease, treating them so that we can prevent the onset of Alzheimer's disease entirely. I think there's a unique opportunity here, not just in the magnitude of clinical effect, but what may also be unique about this particular space is that moving earlier may also be associated with fewer complications of therapy because you're intervening in a healthier brain with less pathologic disease burden. And of course, it goes without saying that we're continuing to innovate next generation amyloid targeting therapies, tau targeting therapies, genetic medicines, nucleic acid based medicines, novel delivery. So happy to talk about any and all of those as time allows.
That's great. As you said, these are complex treatments to deliver and bring to people, and especially those who are rural citizens, minorities, underserved communities, even just co-payments for some of these meds put them pretty much out of reach for some families. What is your perspective on making sure there is an equity aspect to the accessibility of these emerging treatments?
Yeah, we take that extremely seriously. I think this is a case where it's such the early stages of actually accessing these therapies that the issues related to equity and access would be like a primary concern for the launch of most medicines. Here, we're at such early innings that even people that have means and are typically at the early adoption curve of healthcare innovation are having trouble accessing this therapy. So I don't mean to trivialize in any way the idea of health equity in amyloid-targeted therapies or Alzheimer's disease, but actually our issues are profound and fundamental across the space. But I think actually there's a lot we can do as a pharmaceutical company to help this. We can't solve all the problems. We can solve a lot. We work very hard on affordability of our medicines. Happy to talk about that. One of the issues we've heard about in Alzheimer's disease specifically that makes accessing our therapies challenging is the diagnostic paradigm that currently exists, where patients have to be ascertained either by invasive testing of their cerebrospinal fluid or by a PET scan, which is not universally available despite being commercially approved for years. We're working very hard on non-invasive testing, blood-based testing, which would be highly validated, which we think would really help with the pathologic diagnosis of patients and eliminate a barrier to accessing. And then, of course, you just have to like look through the entire patient journey. So there's diagnosis, there's the ability to seek a qualified healthcare professional, access to the proper MRI scans that are needed to ensure safety of these products, and then affordability of the medicine. So we're working through every segment of that. We've also worked with national payers like CMS. I think we've made a lot of progress there to make sure that that's not a barrier. So we're working on this. We're at the early innings of this. I think one of the opportunities of working at a company like Lilly is you can afford to think in 5 and 10 year or even longer horizons. Some of these areas that we're entering the market, like donanemab, I think are an initial down payment on evolving the healthcare system and continuing to innovate with next generation medicines that will actually span beyond the life of any individual medicine. So there's a lot of work we have to do in this space.
That's great. And based on what we've learned from the clinical trials, I mean, we know these anti-amyloid therapies may slow down the progression of the disease, yet it seems very likely that they may benefit subgroups of patients while perhaps putting at risk of undesirable side effects other subgroups of patients. And my question for you is, how do you think, how can we work together to figure this out, to really identify those patients that are most likely to benefit as opposed to those who are most likely not only not to benefit, but actually to experience potentially serious adverse events?
Yeah, I think obviously this gets a little bit into like the highly like technical details of the clinical trials design, but I think in a broad level, the way that we've designed our programs in Alzheimer's disease and generally across the company is to ensure that we're characterizing patients' disease burden on both a pathologic and clinical level at the time of entry, even if that creates more nuance in the sort of interpretation of the data at study readout. So one of the issues that came up in the advisory committee relates to our characterization of patients' tau levels, which is another marker for pathologic disease burden. Arguably, the only reason we were having that conversation is because we're the first company to actually measure that routinely in patients coming on our clinical trials. If you were simply thinking from like a pharmaceutical executive mindset, you may say like, it's too much complexity, it provides like too much opportunity to subset patients. We've taken exactly the opposite view, which is it's our obligation to generate detailed scientific evidence, and we're happy to engage in those conversations and evolve the field. So although it's added to the complexity of interpretation of data in this field, I think it's the right thing to do. It advances the science of the field, and it does enable patients and providers to have more nuanced conversations about whether these therapies are right for them. Again, I think these are conversations that also tend to happen at like large academic institutions that are well-resourced. My concern is like, are patients being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, like in the first place? Are they being diagnosed at the earliest stages of disease? Like, this is, our healthcare system is like really just inventory of these patients to date and moving to a more interventionalist treatment approach, which I think is where we need to be as a society, is where we are now, but it's gonna take a while.
And David, I want to shift gears a little bit and give you a chance to highlight your oncology pipeline, which you're very active in that space. And maybe we could touch on the developments we've been seeing with radiotherapy, given the success of Lutathera and Pluvicto and the new alpha-emitting therapies. So maybe speak to what Lilly's doing in this space and what drove the acquisition of Point last year.
Absolutely, yeah. So oncology has the distinction, I think for obvious reasons, of being the therapeutic area where we tend to see the earliest adoption of new therapeutic modalities. This has been a sort of repeated observation, be it an initial observation of introduction of biologics or complex engineered biologics, antibody drug conjugates, cell therapies, immunotherapy, so on and so forth. And I think the pattern is repeating itself again, with radiopharmaceuticals. These are pharmaceuticals that are targeted pharmaceutical products. They basically have a sort of homing mechanism where you can direct the application of radiation, infuse radiation to specific parts, organs, or tissues in the body, in this case, cancer. And I think it's incredibly exciting to see the work that has been pioneered with the two products that you mentioned. What really, to me, excited me about the space is the recognition. There's a couple things. One is that it provides an entirely new sort of target space for us as pharmaceutical companies to work on. So yeah, it's just an entirely new opportunity for targeting different antigens, and that doesn't happen every day in oncology. I think the other is that when you speak to providers who are using these medicines, there is a proportion of patients that receive these medicines that have dramatic responses. Like in prostate cancer, there's a proportion of patients that basically have disease debulking that amounts to long-term disease control despite the therapy treatment course being completed. And that is something that we basically never saw with existing modalities in prostate cancer. So I think there's an opportunity to make a real leap for patients that's akin to what we've seen with introduction of other new treatment modalities in oncology. I think the other piece that excites us is that when you look at the approved products, they're all products that were fundamentally invented in academic laboratories. Right. And my general experience is that while academic laboratories are like incredible at the initial scientific discovery or making like early lead-op programs, pharma can add a lot in sort of professionalizing these targets and making them even better, like more selective for tumor, more sparing of healthy tissues, using entirely new treatment modalities outside of small molecules, mini proteins or peptides, other things like that. And so I'm incredibly excited to see what a large pharmaceutical operation can do by sort of professionalizing the ligand side of the molecule, and then of course also innovating on the isotope side of the molecule. So what is Lilly doing in this space? We are doing quite a bit. We purchased a biotech company called Point Biopharma. That brought a team that's expert in developing these medicines to the company. It brought a large FDA-inspected manufacturing facility, which is key to be able to supply these drugs in a reliable way in our clinical trials. It brought relationships with upstream isotope suppliers. It brought a pipeline, and then we've continued, obviously, to invest heavily in developing that pipeline internally. So again, this is a 5, 10+ year horizon investment, but I think this is going to be a big innovation for patients with oncology, with cancer over time, and we're excited to be part of that.
Right, and you mentioned up front that given the influx of cash from your GLP-1s, this presents a pretty unique opportunity for Lilly to invest in the next innovations in the space, broadly outside of metabolism in oncology, in neuro as well. We didn't go deep on the early pipeline, but it's pretty extensive. So maybe you can talk about how Lilly is balancing both internal and external partnerships to drive forward the next leg.
Yeah, I think it's important for any company to make sure that you're balancing these two. I think external innovation is not a strategy because you don't know sort of what the inventory is going to look like. You need to make sure that you're innovating internally, that it has to be sort of the core of what we do. But we recognize there's a lot of incredible science happening externally, and I think what you'll see from us moving forward is something akin to what you've seen from us before, which is we're not in the business of buying sort of a discounted cash flow, like and adding to the P&L. That's like we don't want to turn balance sheet into P&L. That's not sort of our strategy. But I think what you'll see is a lot of bolt-on deals, but you'll just see more of them because we have the financial wherewithal, and obviously we're investing heavily in just the human resources necessary to prosecute those deals. But I think the strategy is unchanged. The importance of looking externally to the incredible science is absolutely aligned. I think you'll just see us do more and more of these deals. because we have the capacity to do so. So, we like to have a healthy mix of internal and external innovation.